My name is Austin, and this is my review of the album Midnights by Taylor Swift. I'm choosing to review this album for a specific reason. Over the last 2 years, I've had many issues sleeping. There have been different forms of not sleeping that I've experienced, and to me, they aren't equal. The best type of not sleeping is when I'm able to fall asleep right away, but wake up after only 2 or 3 hours, unable to fall back asleep. And although I'm only getting 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night, in my experience, I can live off this and function normally for about a month. Um, the next type of not sleeping is when I'm able to fall asleep relatively quickly, within an hour, and I wake up throughout the night multiple times, and each time it takes me some time to fall back asleep. This is not as good as just waking up and being awake, but I can still function off this for a couple of weeks. The worst type of sleep for me is when I lie in bed for hours, unable to fall asleep, and when I eventually do, I wake up only a couple hours later. After one night like this, I'm exhausted. After three or four, I I feel like I can't function. This album came out at a relevant point in my life. 2 months ago, I had to take medical leave from my job because my sleep deprivation reached the point where it was unsafe for me to work. And although my sleep had stabilized some since then, if the extended edition of this album was released at 3 a.m. in my time zone, I would have been awake to hear it because I had been lying in bed for hours, not being able to fall asleep. What drove me to review this album is the 5 short videos that Taylor included with the album on Spotify, in which she explicitly listed 5 things that she's lost sleep over. A big part of this review is going to be me discussing 5 things I've lost sleep over. Before I get started, I need to discuss definitions I have for the words knowledge and belief because they are integral to the way I conceptualize my sleeplessness. This definition of belief is singular and does not apply to every situation the word is used in. In fact, I would say its usage is fairly limited, and it doesn't make a lot of sense out of what I might say in this video. Knowledge is something I consider to be cognitive. It's based in thought. It is always conscious, it's rational, and it can be articulated in a denotational manner. It is based in reality if I'm using a basic definition of reality. Knowledge can inform decisions. Beliefs, according to my definition, are very different. They aren't cognitive, they are based in emotional experience. Beliefs often use connotational definitions of words. Beliefs can be conscious, but they don't have to be. Most importantly, beliefs do not have the burden of being based in reality. What makes this scary is that although knowledge has the ability to inform decisions, beliefs have the ability to define behaviors. If I were to characterize my idea of beliefs without using a definition, it would be to describe my usage of the phrase "it feels like." As I've written more about my thoughts, emotions, decisions, and behaviors, I've realized I use the phrase, "it feels like," with some frequency. What makes this phrase interesting is what follows it is almost never a feeling. It's almost always a thought. For example, I've said the phrase, "it feels like people don't like me." The question is, why am I using the word feels when I'm discussing a thought? I believe I do this because the thought has a feeling associated with it. What's concerning about this is a phrase of the form, "it feels like thought." I can know the thought isn't true, but I'll still behave in accordance with the feeling. Whenever I write and I have the ability to go back and review my usage, I go through every instance of "it feels like," and in almost all of them, I replace it with "I believe." This is the idea of believe I have in this video. I'm calling this video a review, but the actual review isn't going to show up until the very end. It is going to be a lot of time with me establishing different thoughts by using the lyrics and songs on the album. I'm going to talk about seven songs in total. The first 5 are going to be used to define something that's kept me up at night. The way I'm going to talk about these songs is to bring up a lyric, give a brief discussion of the lyric, tell stories from my life, revisit the lyric, and then define something that's kept me up at night. The first song with lyrics I'd like to discuss is "Lavender Haze." The 2 lines of question are from the chorus. The first is, "I'm damned if I do give a damn what people say." And the second is, "the 1950s shit they want from me." I like these lines because within the same chorus, we have one line, the first one, which is a strong statement on individuality to me, followed by the second, which characterizes a group of people by the decade they lived in, which removes individuality for me. My relationship with the word man has been historically complicated. I'm not certain of all the sources of where my concept of the word man comes from because it started at such a young age. What I do know is how selective I've been in applying the word to myself. When it was good to be a man, I would never call myself a man. I'm not strong, I'm not stoic, I could continue. I remember my granddad telling me John Wayne is what a man should be. I know I'm not John Wayne. I would call myself a man when it limited me, though. This mostly has to do with self-expression. If there was a way I wanted to express myself, whether it be saying something or doing something, if I deemed it unmanly, I wouldn't let myself do it. This was mostly done unconsciously. It took me over 29 years to realize purple is my favorite color, I'm allowed to say things with my clothes, and it's okay to use an exclamation point. Most significantly, I would use the word man to put myself down. Most people don't know I went through a period where I exhibited restrictive eating behaviors. I would only eat 1 meal a day, or if I ate more than that, I would burn as many calories as I could by going for a 10-mile walk or run or something. In doing this, I lost over 100 pounds in a way that medical professionals have told me was unhealthy. The only reason why I bring up these restrictive eating behaviors is to talk about a conversation I had with a friend in which I mention it's challenging to have these issues as a man. It wasn't my intention to say these issues aren't challenging for women. I also didn't want to communicate that men should be ashamed if they have these kinds of issues. The only intention in those words was to put myself down because I believed as a man I was given easy mode, and somehow, because I'm so pathetic, I still develop these issues anyway. Once I realized the effect the word man has on me, I asked myself how it got this way. And the only answer I could come up with was that my concept of the word man has come entirely from what I see in other people. I would see somebody and say, that's a true man. And functionally, what this is doing is saying there is a singular concept of what a man is. And when I say that out loud, it sounds odd. I think the first step in me not using the word man in a harmful way to myself is to do my best to see society as a collection of individuals and not a group of people that may or may not meet a singular concept. Once again, the lyrics are, I'm damned if I do give a damn what people say, and the 1950 shit they want from me. The first thing that kept me up at night, trying to believe human being is the only label I can apply to myself. The next song with meaningful lyrics to me is Sweet Nothing. The two lines I'm going to talk about are in succession. They are, and the voices that implore, you should be doing more. To you I can admit that I'm just too soft for all of it. What I like about these lyrics is there's an implication that there's a person in Taylor's life that she trusts and can admit certain things to. But by putting these lyrics in a song and releasing that song to the world, she is saying those same things to anybody who listens, which is a class of people she can't control. I'm an engineer by trade, and I would have dreams in which a mistake I made resulted in someone dying. I would wake up in the middle of the night, I'd go to work at the early hours of the morning, and I'd review whatever it was I'd been working on. Additionally, there were days that even if I left at 4 in the afternoon, I would think about work for so long that I'd lie in bed for hours, unable to fall asleep. In engineering school, I learned how to solve certain engineering problems. Something I wish I realized earlier in life is that engineering isn't truth. Almost every engineering problem is based in assumptions and models. The most important thing I learned in college was when a professor said, no model is correct, some models are useful. I'm not trying to hate on my university, but I have one complaint about my education. While I was taught that models aren't perfect, I was never taught how to select a certain model and how to justify using a model in a given situation. This carried into work for me. There were parts of my job with established rules. For example, there is a long time rule on how to calculate the allowable pressure for a certain component. I was very comfortable with these rules because if you asked 100 competent engineers to calculate the allowable pressure of a certain component, you would get 100 identical answers. There was something about it that felt exact and that perfection was possible. The part of my job I lost sleep over was when there wasn't established rules and I had to find my own way to model a problem. I was stressed because I told myself that I needed to be perfect in a situation where perfection wasn't possible. Recently, I've learned my evaluation of the part of my job with established rules is incorrect. While it's true that 100 competent engineers could come up with 100 identical answers about the allowable pressure a component can see to be within code, if you ask every engineer on the planet the exact pressure at which a specific component will fail, none of them could give you a correct answer. I still feel a need to be perfect at work, but I'm trying something new. In the past, there was only a couple of people I believed I could talk to about the stress I had over knowing I'm not perfect. Now I'm trying to communicate my fallibility to everyone. I do simple things like dress differently and change my email signature. But most importantly, I walk through my thought process with anyone to show that there is uncertainty in it and there always will be uncertainty in it. Once again, the lyrics are, and the voices that implore, you should be doing more. To you I can admit that I'm just too soft for all of it. The second thing that kept me up at night, trying to believe it's okay for me to be imperfect. The next song is Question. The two lines I like frame the chorus. They are, can I ask you a question? And it's just a question. What I like about these lines is they bookend a series of questions that can't directly receive a response and are at least slightly detached from the person the questions are directed to, if there even is a specific person. The more I write, the more I realize how much my usage affects the way my words make me feel. An example of a word I use in an interesting way is just. I just wanted to know. I was just trying to find out. I just thought you would like are 3 examples of phrases in which I use the word just in a way that adds no denotational value to the phrase. I just wanted to know and I wanted to know are equivalent in literal value. This begs the question of why I'm using the word just. The first guess is it's filler. It wouldn't be the first word I use that way. For example, without conscious effort, I use the word that in an unnecessary way frequently. But I don't believe that's why I use just. My main evidence for this is my usage of the word just changes when I'm just writing for myself versus when I'm writing an email or chat message to someone at work. When I am writing something that is going to be directly received by another human being, I use just at a much higher frequency. I also know I feel differently when I use the word just. When I say I just wanted to know instead of I wanted to know, I feel smaller. I believe I use the word just because I believe I need to defend me asking or saying something I want to say. When I was in high school, I had a teacher who, when a student asked, "Can I go to the bathroom?" would respond, "I'm sure you can. The question is, may you?" At the time, I rolled my eyes and thought he was an asshole, but now I see what he said differently. I don't understand why children use the phrase "can I," but when I think of me as an adult asking someone if I can do something I am completely physically capable of, it seems ridiculous. I'm not certain why I use "can I" in this way. An example I want to use matches the lyric directly, which is, "Can I ask you a question?" I love how self-completing this statement is, because the instant you finish the sentence, you're answering it. Yes, I literally can ask that person a question. I believe this sentence has a very odd denotational value that doesn't really need to be communicated. So, why am I asking if I can ask a question? I believe it's because I'm worried that the question I'm going to ask is going to hurt or upset or something the person I'm asking the question to, and I don't believe I have a right to ask that question if them answering it is going to cause them any pain. I still believe I don't have a right to an answer to any question I ask. That doesn't mean I'm not allowed to ask the question. Once again, the lyrics are, "Can I ask you a question?" It's just a question. The third thing I lost sleep over: trying to believe I belong in a conversation. Of all the songs I'm going to discuss, I'm going to pick the most lyrics from Mastermind, discussing 8 lines in total. The first 4 lines are the ones that open the song. "Once upon a time, the planets and the fates, and all the stars align. You and I ended up in the same room at the same time." The next 4 close the chorus. "What if I told you I'm a mastermind, and now you're mine? It was all by design, 'cause I'm a mastermind." What I'll mention about these lyrics up front is the contradictory nature of them. How a song themed around an individual having complete control begins with a discussion of fate. I have 2 stories to share for this song. The first is from a conversation I had with a friend that led to me writing her a letter and an email chain that followed. The conversation featured her making a 2-sentence comment that I found interesting because I had had the same thoughts earlier in my life. I knew my experiences with these 2 sentences were different than hers, so I wrote her a letter about how her words had appeared in my life. Although it was only tangentially related, my letter ultimately took the form of describing the decision of purchasing this hat. In order to describe that purchase, I had to discuss my childhood, college, and adulthood. It took me over 2,000 words. When she responded in the following email chain, it described what the the 2 sentence comment meant to her. She also described her childhood, college, and adulthood. What I'm trying to establish here is even in just a couple of sentences, there are a lifetime's worth of experiences that can go into them. And I consider my understanding of that 2 sentence comment and her understanding of that 2 sentence comment equivalent, despite them being fairly different. When I realized how much experience goes into even small amounts of communication, I learned that it's not possible to effectively communicate anything significant in a small number of words. When I realized this, I thought back to all of the ways I've struggled to communicate in the past. When I've spoken with connotation, it didn't come across the way I wanted it to. When I've spoken with denotation, it hasn't come across the way I wanted it to. When I try to speak thematically, it hasn't always worked. Ultimately, I've reached the conclusion I can't control the way a person reacts to my words because I do not know the entire set of life experiences that goes into what that person hears me say. As a result, outside of very specific conversations, no matter who I'm with or how many people I'm around, the only person I talk to is myself. The second story is an example of that. It is a conversation with someone I had never met before. When I was talking to him, he was holding an iPad and it wasn't loading as fast as he wanted. So he made the comment that he wanted to shake it even though he knew it wouldn't work. And he joked in a way that made it seem like he believed he was silly. My reaction to this was frustration because I've recently realized how laughing off certain decisions has hurt me. The more I think about the decisions I've made, the more I'm becoming convinced that a decision cannot be judged on the outcome. Whether the results have been positive or negative, I've used judging a decision by the outcome in damaging ways. Starting with negative outcomes, if I made a decision and something bad happened, when I asked myself why I decided to do what I did, I would give the answer, because I'm bad. The issue with defining decisions on personality traits is that it's fairly unproductive, as all I can do is shrug my shoulders and walk away with nothing more than self hatred. I'm trying to learn, if I ask myself, why did I do this? And my answer comes in the form of because I'm adjective, then I haven't truly thought the question through. I have to approach the question, why did I do this, in an objective way? And if I'm using the result to define the decision, I can't be objective. I've also had issues saying all's well that ends well, because it's allowed me to dismiss concerning decision making. When I was 10 years old, I had to have my appendix removed. There was a point where I was fairly certain my appendix had burst, and I knew if that was left unchecked, I could die. Despite this, I waited over 24 hours to tell my parents that I thought my appendix burst, because I was concerned I was going to waste their time if they took me to the hospital and it was a false alarm. For almost 2 decades, I've told this story as a joke, but now, to me, it's not very funny. It's concerning to me that a 10-year-old who wanted to live was just as concerned about wasting his parents' time as he was about potentially dying. I'm not saying this can never be funny. I'm saying I can't dismiss this as funny. And I have to ask myself why I consider those equally important with genuine curiosity. Going back to the conversation with the individual with the iPad, when he made the comment about wanting to shake the iPad and him being silly for thinking that, my reaction once again was to be frustrated, because I've seen how much dismissing something like that has hurt me in the past. But I am not upset. My reaction was to be frustrated, because I can't control that. And I stopped and asked myself, why am I frustrated? And I realized that I was trying to apply my life experiences to this individual. And I somehow had the thought that my decision making process, or my evaluations of my decision making process, should apply to everyone, despite me knowing this isn't true. And when I realized that was the part where my frustration was coming from, I wanted to laugh at myself. And a habit that I've been getting into that will probably get me into trouble someday is when I realize I'm over applying my life experiences to someone else, I say the most ridiculous thing I can think of. So when he said something about wanting to shake the iPad, I replied in a joking manner I mean, it's not like it's a baby. I did not say this because I believe shaken baby syndrome is funny, because I don't. I said this to make fun of myself. And additionally, I said it because if I say something to an individual where I am almost certain the intention is not coming across, it helps remind me that I don't fully understand his intention. My favorite part of the interaction between me and him was his response. He said, "I got it. I don't think I should laugh." I like this because I believe everything he says is true. I believe him when he says he got it. And it's not because I think he understood my intention. I believe that's very unlikely. The reason why I say he got it goes back to the conversation with my friend and the letter I wrote about this hat, where my conclusion was we had equal understandings of the same sentences because of our life experiences. I believe this applies to the situation between me and this man and the joke I told. Because no matter how much intention I put into words, my definitions of these words are still based in my life experiences, just like his definitions are based in his life experiences. And to say my understanding of a certain set of words is more valid than his is to say that my life experiences are more valid than his, which I do not believe. Overall, it was easy for me to joke with the person who talked about shaking the iPad because I had never met him before and I'll probably never see him again. Something I still struggle with is trying to make people I love happy with my words. This occurs especially when I believe I'm going to make a decision that could negatively impact a person I love's happiness. When I think about making this decision, I will lie in bed for hours, unable to sleep, trying to find the perfect combination of words that will make them happy. Because if I can't make them happy with my words, then I can't justify doing something I consider selfish that could hurt them, even if it would help me. Once again, the lyrics are, "Once upon a time, the planets and the fates and all the stars aligned. You and I ended up in the same room at the same time. And what if I told you I'm a mastermind and now you're mine? It was all by design, because I'm a mastermind." The fourth thing that kept me up at night, trying to believe I can't make a person feel a certain way with my words. The final song I'll use to define a reason I couldn't sleep is Bejeweled. I'm only going to use one line. Putting someone first only works when you're in their top 5. I have nothing explicit to say about this lyric. I'm not certain how long this belief has been present in my life, but For as long as I can remember, I've had a sense of worthlessness. I know I'm not worthless, but I believe it. I've also believed that every person on this planet has value, except for me. I don't know how many times I've been told to put other people before myself, but I know I haven't taken any directive more to heart. Putting others before myself is the strongest belief I have. I know this because over the last few years, I've fought it here and there and have felt terrible every time. A result of my belief that I should put others before myself is another belief, which is other people's happiness is more important than mine. And I believe if I decide to do something good for me at the cost of another person, I'm a terrible human being. If somebody recommends a book to me, I'll eventually return with a book report. Earlier this year, a friend recommended a novel to me, and I came back with an emotional book report. The novel upset me because it featured a character who threatened suicide to influence the decision making of other characters. This upset me because of my history with suicide. I've had a group therapy member kill themselves. That impacted the way I interacted with people for 3 or 4 years. With the circles I've run in, I've met a number of people who've tried to kill themselves and heard some hard stories surrounding that. I have a story of my own. In January of 2019, I took more of a lethal medication than I was prescribed with the intention of dying. Before anything happened, I made myself throw up. I called my doctor and eventually got to an ER. There were several hours when I was being treated in the ER before I was sent to a psychiatric hospital. In that time, I called my mother and explained what happened. I don't remember her words. I remember the sound of her voice. Up until a few weeks ago, that was the saddest moment of my life. I couldn't believe how close I came to hurting her. For a long time, I argued with people over whether what I did qualified as a suicide attempt. Almost everyone believed it was, but I fought it. I don't remember my exact reasoning, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the reason I argued was because I didn't want to admit to myself that I tried to kill myself, because then I would have to accept that I decided to hurt people that badly. For some time, I've had a list of people I've told myself I need to survive for. A person being on the list has nothing to do with how much I like them. The only criteria is how much I believed me dying would hurt them. Although I survived the event I just described, my suicidal thoughts didn't go away. I hated myself because of this. I told myself that apologies are more about actions than words. And if I was truly sorry for almost hurting the people that loved me, then I shouldn't even think about suicide. And I would ask myself why I was being so selfish to even consider it. I eventually began abusing alcohol because of how much I hated myself over this. I consistently made the decision that not feeling that self-hatred was more important than being able to engage in life in a meaningful way. There was a point where I honestly believed the best possible life I could live was to be drunk and alone as much as possible. And the main emotion driving this belief was based in the self-hatred I had for thinking about killing myself. I used alcohol to separate myself from other people. An example of this has to do with my roommate at the time. The way our apartment was structured, in order to get from the room where I would watch movies to the fridge required me walking through the living room where my roommate spent a good amount of her time. On nights when I chose to drink beer, I would actually load up a cooler and take it to the room I would watch movies in. I told my roommate this was because I didn't want to walk back and forth to the fridge. But the truth is, I didn't want to walk through the living room because she might talk to me and I needed to be alone. Because even if I was drunk, if she talked to me, all that self-hatred would come back. The only reason why I bring up alcohol is to establish how much I put myself down for even thinking about suicide. Going back to the book report, I mentioned some of the things I just discussed. And when I wrote that book report, I felt that self-hatred all over again. Something else I talked about in the report is sometimes when I read a book or watch a movie, something I can struggle with when it comes to mental health is I can oftentimes tie a character's behaviors back to a real life person. And when the character in the novel threatened suicide, I thought of people I've known that have done that. When I wrote this part of the book report, I was angry. I was mad at these people. Because I knew that people can get really hurt by suicide, and I didn't believe threatening people with that pain was okay. A little bit after I sent the book report to my friend, I sent her another email saying I wasn't happy with what I wrote. And one of the things I wasn't happy with was how I expressed anger towards the people I've known that have tried to kill themselves. I try to talk about emotion and not talk with emotion. And I wish I had taken more time between reading that book and writing my thoughts on it so I could separate myself a little bit more from the emotional experience. Because the people I discussed were people I didn't really know. And I didn't know what led to them deciding to do the things I've discussed. And to approach that situation with anger isn't productive in my mind, because I know there is a lifetime of human experiences that led to those people believing that behavior was the best thing they could do. And I don't really understand those experiences, especially since I didn't know any of them very well. The reason why I brought up discussing these people with anger is because there's an individual I didn't mention in the book report. I didn't intentionally leave them out because I didn't explicitly list names or anything. I just generally referred to people. I simply didn't consider being angry at them in a moment where I was very angry. What makes this person special is they're also on the list of people I told myself I need to survive for. And I am not trying to say I should be angry at this person. What I'm trying to establish is the disconnect between the self-hatred I feel for thinking about hurting a person whose actions I don't consider. Going back to the belief I'm worthless, that word implies I have zero worth. Zero is arguably the most finite number we have, but I believe it can have depth, and I believe it can have magnitude. And I didn't know the magnitude of worthlessness I've assigned myself until I realized how much higher I was putting other people. Once again, the lyrics are, putting someone first only works when you're in their top 5. The fifth thing that kept me up at night, trying to believe I have any value as a human being. I've just used 5 songs to discuss some things that are fairly hard for me. I'm going to use 2 more songs to discuss what I'm going to try to do moving forward. The first is Anti-Hero, and the line is, "It must be exhausting, always rooting for the anti-hero." All of the 5 things I've said kept me up at night began with the phrase, trying to believe. This is where my definitions of belief and knowledge become critical. Once again, knowledge is based on thought, and beliefs, to me, are based in emotional experience. I've only recently created these definitions, and because of that, for most of my life, I've treated knowledge and beliefs as if they were the same thing. I would try to change my beliefs with thoughts, but in my experience, thoughts can't change what it feels like. Although there have been many different things I've tried to believe, the experience has always been like trying to convince myself a glass is half full when I believe it's half empty. To try and put a positive spin on things. When it comes to myself, I would try to say positive things about myself and be positive. I have not once, as far as I know, changed a belief based in emotion through rational argument. So I would lie in bed trying to tell myself positive things about me despite believing terrible things about myself, and it never worked. Once again, the lyric is, It must be exhausting, always rooting for the anti hero. The final song I'm going to use to establish this review is Snow on the Beach. The two lines are, and it's fine to fake it till you make it, till you do, till it's true. While I don't believe thoughts can change beliefs, I still believe beliefs can change. At the beginning of all this, I said beliefs have the ability to define behaviors. I very consciously included the words have the ability to, instead of just saying beliefs define behaviors. I added these words because I know with conscious thought I can behave in a way that doesn't align with my beliefs. One of the most important lessons I've learned is if I'm trying to believe something new, the best way to do that is to behave as if I already believed it. The thought process behind this is even if I'm making decisions on a premise I believe is false, I can't deny the results. If I were to believe or behave as if I believed something I didn't, and the results continuously came back positive, that is something I can use to reshape my beliefs. I've already given one example in this video of a way that I'm trying to behave differently by talking about how at work I am trying to communicate my uncertainty to help me believe it's okay to be imperfect. This video itself is an attempt to believe I belong in a conversation and I can't make a person feel a certain way with my words. When it comes to feeling a certain way with my words, the idea that I've been trying to do is starting with the lyrics on the screen without my face, saying these are Taylor's words, and then telling life stories, and then me repeating the lyrics with my face on the screen to show that I am certain Taylor has an incredible amount of intention in these lyrics, but her intention can never completely make it through the stories I'm telling. And these words can have meaning to me too. And although Taylor is an incredibly talented songwriter, she is a human being, and I am a human being. And we both have our own right to what these words mean to us. I'm going to tell two more stories about how I'm trying to believe I have value as a person. The first has to do with a friend who is the only person in the world I believe likes me. I met this friend at the coffee shop he works at when I walked in one day with a collection of short stories, and he commented on the author and expressed interest, and we had an interesting conversation, but it only lasted a couple minutes because he was working. And I would continue to come to this coffee shop for months, and we talked, but once again, never more than 2 minutes at a time. And then one day, he asked me if I liked writing, and I said I did. And he asked me if I'd like to write with him, and I said I would. And so now, for the most part, every week we meet up, we show up with our laptops, we type out whatever it is we want to work on, and then we share what we've written with each other. And then we talk about what we're trying to talk about. And every time we meet up, when it's time for us to go home, when we walk out and go separate ways in the parking lot to our cars, he always thanks me for spending time with him. And I find this funny. And the reason why I find this funny is because he is the first person in my life where every second I've spent with him, every joke I've told him, every word I've shared with him has been because that's what I wanted to do. I have not once tried to make him happy. I believe I have been incredibly selfish. And so I find it hilarious that he's thanking me for spending my time with him. Once again, this is the only person in the world I believe likes me. Second story is a little more complicated. I overall have had an interesting relationship with family members of older generations. And I don't mean that it's bad. I get along with all of them. What's interesting is that pretty much entirely when I'm with family members of an older generation, they are the ones that decide what we're going to do. There has been one exception to this, which is last year I was at a family gathering, and one of my uncles was wearing a shirt for a state park, and this was the time when I was trying to get around to as many state parks as I could. So I asked him about it, and I don't remember the exact conversation, what all we talked about, but I know somewhere in there I asked him if he and my aunt would like to go, and they said yes. And we ended up making an entire weekend out of it. We ended up going to 2 different parks. And we went to a restaurant in a town that we had all heard of the restaurant, but none of us had actually been there. And then in the town they lived in, when we were back there at night, like, they showed me a few restaurants that they really liked where they're from. And on Sunday, before I left to go home, they invited me to another park later in the year. And I believe that we all enjoyed this, and I'm certain I enjoyed it. And that entire weekend wouldn't have happened if I hadn't, for the first time in my life, asked a family member of an older generation if they wanted to do something I wanted to do. About a month ago, my cousin on the same side of the family got married, and that aunt and uncle were at the wedding, and they were at the reception. Um, and I was talking to a number of family members at the reception and everything like that, and I had spoken with this aunt and uncle for a bit, but I ended up leaving the reception a little bit earlier than most people did, and the venue for the wedding was in a more rural area, so in order to get from the reception to the parking lot, you had to walk through this path in the woods, and I'm not really certain why my uncle was out there, but we crossed each other on this path, and it was just us, and we had a conversation about the next time we see each other, and everything, and I don't remember if I stuck out my hand to shake his hand, or if I just in general stepped away. What I do remember is he just reached out his arm and hugged me. And this hug felt nice, but there was something odd about it. And the drive home I had from the wedding was an hour and a half, and I spent almost the entire drive thinking about that hug and what was odd about it. And then I ended up lying in bed for hours thinking about it. And I don't remember exactly when I put it together, but what I eventually realized is that hug was the first moment I believed someone loved me. My reaction to that was to ask myself how I made it 29 years without believing someone loved me. And that was a pretty hollowing experience for a bit. And I could talk about any number of people, my believing my sister, never believing my sister loved me, never believing my grandparents loved me, and any number of people. But for the rest of this story, I'm just going to talk about my parents, and the reason why I choose them is not because of them, it's because thinking about them, me believing they don't love me hurt more than anyone else, right? Like I sat down and told myself my parents love me is a statement I know is true, but I don't believe it. And putting that into words and saying it out loud has hurt more than anything I've been through. And these last few weeks has been the saddest time of my life. However, I wouldn't call this the worst time of my life. Because I've approached the belief my parents don't love me in a way I haven't approached a lot of beliefs in the past. I haven't said the belief is bad. I haven't blamed my parents. I haven't blamed myself. I, most importantly, have not been trying to convince myself that it's okay. I've reached a point where I'm done with the half glass full, half glass empty game. What I'm telling myself now is the glass has 8 ounces of water. I like this for 2 reasons. The first is I don't have to fight it. It's not hard to accept. The second is, unlike saying a glass is half full or glass is half empty, I get to ask myself the question, well, is that enough water to get me where I want to go? Saying a glass has 8 ounces of water is a metaphor, and it's not the intention to say I'll have perfect data or something like that. What I'm trying to say is I want to call something what it is without saying it's bad and without saying it's good. I just want to say what it is and then ask myself if it's enough. And so when I say I believe my parents don't love me, the question is, am I okay with the way that belief impacts my life? And the answer in this case is no. I'm not okay with that belief and how it affects me. So now I go back to the idea of if I want to believe something new, I'm going to try to behave as if I already believed it. And I think the start with trying to believe my parents love me goes back to the idea of trying to believe I have value as a human. And the reason why I say that is because although it hurts to say I went 29 years with only one moment in which I believe someone loved me, I know it's possible to believe someone loves me. And that started both that moment and the one person I believe likes me came from a place where I was behaving as if I had value. The ultimate goal I have in creating this video is to make the most conscious attempt at behaving in a way to change my current beliefs. I would say this video is the first thing I've created that I consider art, and I believe everything I've said in this video has been a form of artistic expression. And there is intention in releasing this video to anybody in comparison to some of the things I've written in the past, which I've just given to friends. I've really been going through it lately, and I haven't slept as much as I'd like. But one thing I've realized through the creation of this video is, for the first time in my life, I consciously believe things can get better. I've spent a lot of time talking about the songs and myself. The review of the album is going to be only one sentence long. Any album that can make me think and feel all of the things I've just discussed is an incredible work of art. Thank you.